Hello photo enthusiasts, this is a review of the Voigtländer 40mm f1.2 Nocton for the Sony E Mount system. If you're that kind of guy who has never been able to decide whether to take a 35 or 50mm lens with yourself, great, now you're having one more option, which is making the decision even more difficult to make. If you're watching this video, chances are that you have already made your mind up about buying a manually focusing lens. If not, then don't be afraid to do so. Focusing manually is easier than you might think, and the Sony system also has got some aids to make manually focusing more simple. You have got the focus peaking, which I personally do not like, but some people do like it. And you also have the focus magnification, which I personally use extensively. You even have the option to use an auto magnification, which means that whenever you're turning the focusing wheel, then you get an automatic magnification of the field you're having your focus in. So with a little training you'll become reasonably fast with autofocus. Sure, there are situations in which I have had a manually focusing lens with myself, and in which I would have, or on which I had wished I would have had automatically focusing lens. There are some wonderful options for the Sony system, like the G Masters, which are having this eye autofocus. You're just pushing the button, and then the lens will automatically focus on the eye of your subject. And honestly, if I was doing professional work, I would rather choose an automatically focusing lens, even if the image quality was much lower, because like if you work professionally, you must not miss the shots, right? However, for me, photography is a hobby, and I just, of course, these prime manually focusing lenses, they have got some advantages. They are like lightweight and high quality, you get amazing image quality, and most of the time you have got a faster lens. But like the main point is for me, and I think for many of you also, that we just enjoy using manually focusing lens because they are beautifully made, and we enjoy the process of taking photos like this, to not put the camera in automatic mode, but in manual mode, doing the focusing manually, and it's just fun. That's why I'm using these lenses so much. Before we take a look at the image quality, let's have a look at how well this lens has been built. And I must say, it's absolutely beautiful. It's an all-metal and glass construction. The focusing ring moves buttery smooth, right with the perfect amount of resistance. The aperture ring moves very nicely, and you've got a metal lens hood which is screwing on and off like this. And I like this system actually very much. Just to give you a comparison, when you take a look at the Zeiss Loxia, and I have made a review of the Loxia 50mm before, like an in-depth review. I invite you to watch the video if you're interested about it. But the Loxia is a very nice lens, and actually, for a lot of reasons, I like it more than the Voigtländer. But just when we are looking at the build qualities, there are some issues with the Loxia. So the first difference is like the lens hood is also made of metal, but if we are taking a closer look, we can, I mean, this is minor. I really don't, I'm not really criticizing it, but I'm just giving you all the facts. Like the parts actually where the lens hood is connecting to the lens, they're made out of plastic, and I just like the all metal system of the Voigtländer a little bit more. Another thing with the Loxia is, and I have said this before, like the whole lens is basically comprised of moving parts, which is making it difficult to get a firm grip when you want to screw it on and off. Your camera, you have to use some tricks, you know, you have to put the aperture to f2 to actually get a grip and to screw it on, right? Another lens which you might consider if you're looking for a well-built manually focusing length of the normal focal length. I mean, 40mm is not the normal focal length, but it's like it's living close to it, right? So another option would be the Nocturnus 50mm from Meyer Optic Görlitz. And again, I have already made an in-depth review of this lens. Take a look at the video. And like if I take this lens, it's like very heavy. It's almost twice the weight of the Voigtländer. The Zeiss Loxia, by the way, it's like it's a little bit lighter than the Voigtländer. But if you take a look at this lens, it's like very heavy. It's also very well built. It's coming without a lens hood, but just, you know, this lens has one tiny issue, that like when you're moving the focusing ring, which is like compared to the Voigtländer, it's having more resistance. I mean, it's a more heavy lens, so it's okay, but maybe a little bit less resistance would be nicer. But I hope you can see it in the video. It's tiny, but actually the focusing ring, it's having a tiny little bit of play. When focusing, like in reality, you don't realize it. It's so tiny that it doesn't play any role when using this lens, right? But I mean, it's a very expensive lens, almost, or more than 2 times the price of the Voigtländer. And so it's like a tiny imperfection. And just to compare it, like with the Voigtländer, it's really, there's nothing I could criticize at all. By the way, talking about the Nocturnus, there are rumors that Meyer Optic Görlitz is going bankrupt. And there are not many of these lenses out there, I think. Right now you cannot even buy it on their homepage. You can only make a pre-order for the 3rd line of this lens. This is like the 2nd line. And since the enterprise might go bankrupt, I would be very careful with pre-ordering it. So I'm very happy that I've got one of these lenses for myself. Maybe it will be very hard to get any of these in the future. Let's take a look at some photos, shall we? So here in the first photo we have a pretty girl as a subject, which of course is our most favorite subject, right? I mean, if you're listening to this, chances are that you are a guy, and like because it's guys who are interested in technology and in photography in particular. And of course what we guys do is we like to photograph the beauties of nature, and the female body is like the most beautiful part of nature for us, right? Don't worry, my friends, we are all the same deep inside. And when we look at this photo, what we can see is that it's highly processed. So it would make no sense to discuss contrast or color rendition looking at this photo, but I want to talk about something much more important. Actually, this is like the most important at all, and the first thing you should ask yourself when you consider buying a prime lens is, which focal length do you actually want to buy? Because no other feature of the lens has a bigger impact on your photo than the focal length, right? It's much more important than the speed of the lens or the resolving power or anything else. And I think looking at this photo, we can all agree that it's some kind of portrait, right? And classically, when thinking about portraits, we consider a focal length of 85 millimeter or longer as the right focal length to do portraits. Some professional photographers, first of all, when shooting a medium format, they even shoot with 150 millimeter. The reason for this is that the longer the focal length, the more compression you have got in a photo. And this kind of compression, it's very flattering for facial features in general. So, and I would also suggest this, if you want to do beauty portraiture, then you should indeed use a focal length of like 85 or longer, right? Focal length of 50 millimeter we consider as normal focal length. It is said it's the way it's rendering is very similar to how we perceive reality with our human eyes. Whether this is true is arguable, but let's leave it like this, and let's say that the shorter focal lengths, what they do is they distort in some way. And this distortion means that like the parts of the image which are closer to the lens appear bigger than the parts which are like further away. I mean, this is also the way we see reality with our eyes, but this focal length is exaggerating these effects, right? And when we look at this image, I would say that the angle of her arm and the way her face is tilted and everything, if the same photo had been shot with an 85 millimeter, it would look less interesting, I'm sure about this. And so what I would say is every lens distorts in some way, and every lens changes reality, and our job as a photographer is to use the features of the lens, all the features, the focal length and like the speed and all the features to create images which are more interesting than reality itself. And I think you can also judge the bokeh a little bit in this photo. It has been shot wide open at f1.2, and this is the softest and the most creamy bokeh I can get with any of my lenses. So no other lens I have got is delivering a more a softer and a more creamy bokeh than the Voigtländer 40mm f1.2. It's what it also does is, like, when you open the aperture all the way up, and this is true for any lens, first of all for fast lenses, the lens itself becomes a little bit softer. And this, I mean, the Voigtländer in general, it's by no means a soft lens, but it does become a little bit soft if you open it all the way up. And this is actually beneficial for photography like this, because it's like rendering the whole image in a more harmonic way, and you will have less work on the skin actually. And to tell you this, I have done no skin retouching in this photo here. There's no frequency separation or anything. It has been retouched highly, but it's most of all color correction and playing around with the shadows and highlights. And I was using a curve overlay, right? So here another image. Let's get back to the other image just for a second. I think this might also be interesting for you to notice, because many people say you cannot take photos in midday sunlight, and actually this photo has been shot at noon in the sun. The thing you have to do when shooting in the sun, you have to be aware of the shadows and how the shadows are falling and all of this. And then you see where you have what kind of light, and then you just, you're just observant, and you look at the face and you let the model turn the face in certain ways, and then you try out, and you will see that you can get wonderful photos in sunlight. Here another photo which has been taken indoors, the same model, and just want you to notice how the lens is rendering the composition. It's the effect it's having on the right arm, and also the bokeh, the blur on the background and the foreground, right? In this photo, I would say it's like it would be a more typical situation for such a focal length. When you're using the shorter focal length is when you want to take more of the environment and the scenery with you into the photo, or when you want to shoot the whole person. And when you go a little bit further away, as I did in this photo, also the effect of the distortion is less obvious. And but also in this photo you can realize it has been shot wide open because of the overall rendering. I wanted to have it open. But what you also see when you have a certain distance to the subject, then the background blur, it's becoming not so strong. I mean, you can see in the upper right the bushes and the trees outside. There is some blur, but it's actually it's not so strong. It is so that a 1.2 it's very fast, but 1.2 on a 40 millimeter, it's not the same as a 1.2 and a 50 millimeter. I do not know the exact calculation here, but I would guess it's much rather like a 1.4 or something like this on a 50 millimeter. Here just another photo of the same theme. I mean, it's like the photos I'm showing you right now, it's like it's no lab photos or anything. It's the way I'm taking photos, and I'm showing you what kind of results I have been getting using this lens, right? And again, no skin retouching being done, shot wide open, and you can see the amount of background blur. Actually, the background is not blurred out so much, but what I would say is that the photo overall looks very harmonic, and a very, very nice result, I think. Here you see a photo with the same model, and by the way, she has asked me to mention her name in the video. Her name is Jasmin Schaffrath, and she's living in Frankfurt right now, and she's doing like modeling as a hobby, and her posing is just like from another planet. You see her striking this pose, and she has many other poses. I didn't tell her how to move, she just takes these poses all by herself. It's a pleasure to working with her, and she is also giving courses in posing. So if you come close to Frankfurt, Germany, maybe you find her on Facebook, or if not, if you want to shoot with her, you can also leave a comment below this video, or you contact me and I will initiate the contact if you want, right? So one more photo of the same topic again. To take all the scenery in, I've chosen the 40mm, and you can see what I wanted to capture is like the reflection of this model on the stone wall on the left side. In reality, it was more obvious to me that there was a reflection than it is now in the photo. But still, I think it's this lens, I must say, it renders such scenes in a way, you know, it's giving a little glow. It's delivering the images contrasty. There's not too much resolution. It's the colors are punchy. If you want to produce images like this, you will have very little work with this lens. Also, the black and white from this lens is very nice, by the way. But of course, it has been processed a lot. But this lens makes it easier for you to produce photos in such a way. Nevertheless, here is also a male portrait, and I have said before that this lens is delivering in a feminine way, and let me explain to you what I'm meaning with this. And then I mean, this is my own theory, and maybe afterwards you will tell me that I'm totally crazy, but I'm really thinking in such a way. Like, there are features of a lens which like render the image so that the image in the end will have either a more masculine or more feminine feeling. And it's several features which are working together and bring this about. Like the one obviously is the bokeh, and I don't only mean the strength of the bokeh, but the character of the bokeh, whether it's more structured or whether it's softer. But this is not all. The other thing is, and really this is my theory, that the relation between resolution and contrast is like giving also making it either looking more masculine if you have a higher resolution, not such a strong contrast, or on the other way, as like in what I have shown you before in these very feminine looking images, they were of a high contrast and and not such a strong resolution, right? And all these features together, and maybe other features which I'm not aware of right now, make it so that any lens has like more feminine or masculine characteristics in the way it's rendering the images. That being said, we do post-process the images, right? If you are not using a JPEG program on your camera, we shoot in RAW and we process the images, and we can process them anyway. And in the end, this is not playing such an important role how the contrast or how the clarity from the lens is, because we can change this in post-processing any way we would like it to be. And thus we can take wonderful male portraits as this one, which by the way, I was choosing the 40mm because it was a very cramped space,
this gentleman here. He is standing in a doorway and almost touching the doorway with his right shoulder. And the room behind him was like much darker than the room in front of him, so that I was able to take such a photo. And what I did on the right side, I was just extending the black area in Photoshop to give the photo a more balanced look. So here another photo of a gentleman. He is like a shaman from the Ifugao tribe from the highlands of Luzon. And actually this photo has been shot in a pole house, and pole houses tend to be very tiny and very dark places. And because it's tiny and dark, I thought I'm using a fast lens with a wider field of view. And so I was actually I had only 3 lenses with myself at this time, but so my choice was the Voigtländer 40mm, and I did a lot of mistakes with this photo, which I'm about to tell you. It's like, first of all, let's see how the lighting in this photo is, and let's start with the lighting. There's like when you enter a pole house, you climb a small ladder and then you squeeze yourself through a small hole close to the floor, and this small hole is on the left side of this gentleman, which means it's on the right side of the image, and so there's some light which is hitting him from the left below, right? Another source of light is a little fire which had been burning on the right side of this gentleman. It turns out that like small fires, they produce very little light, but they produce a lot of smoke, and they made all of us cough all the time. But honestly, when I'm looking at the photo now, I cannot see the effect of this fire. I cannot see any light hitting him from the lower right. The third source of light, and this was the brightest light, was an LED which I brought with me and which I was putting on a tripod, and this tripod is standing to my left shoulder. My backside was like pushing really against the wall behind me, and right next to me was this LED. And it is really so that this pole house was hundreds of years old, and these hundreds of years of smoke coming from fires which are not burning so bright has turned the inside of this pole house all black. The walls are black, the floor was black, the ceiling was black, and this place was just swallowing the light. It was cramped. There was no chance that any of us could stand. We had to sit or crouch down, and it was swallowing all light. And my LED, you know, it was not a bright LED. So my idea was, at this moment, it seemed to me a good idea to open the aperture all the way up to let all the light in, which was a very stupid idea. I mean, if you photograph men, don't open the aperture all the way up. You want everything take sharp from front to end. And also, I was telling you before that it was like rendering, the lens is rendering a little bit like softer when you open all the way up. And honestly, the little bit of grain would not have done this image any damage, but my choice of aperture really did a lot of damage. And when you look at his hands and everything, you can see that it's not, there's no good sharpness. And also another very big mistake I was doing is, this gentleman here, he's not used to photos of him being taken. He's like, this region, actually it is a tourist region, but there are very few tourists and very few European tourists. Most come from Asia itself, like Korea. There are some Chinese now, and even tourists from Cambodia or Vietnam. And so he was not, it was the first time someone was photographing him with a camera, actually. I mean, cell phones, every child there has a cell phone, even people who live in stray hats have got cell phones. But first time he was photographed with a real camera, and the first thing he did when he got in front of my camera, he gave me a very warm and a very big smile. And I think you can imagine what I was thinking at this moment. You know, I wanted him to look fierce and dangerous. I wanted to take, like, you know, adventure travel photography, and I wanted to see his determination and the big knife in his hand, and you know, that's the kind of photo I wanted to take. I think you can perfectly imagine what I was thinking at this moment. So I did something very stupid. I told him, could you like stop smiling and look more intense? And of course he is not an actor, and what was happening after this is that his face, it really turned into stone from this moment on. And also his posing, it was very static. I was telling him which poses to take, and then it was looking very static. And afterwards we are all more clever, but at this moment, you know, shamans generally tend to be very good photo subjects, and we don't want to blow the opportunity, but to take the best photos. And so I was trying to save the situation, but I couldn't think clearly at this moment. And what I was telling him to move, and because sometimes I'm doing this with female models, like when it's looking too static, even if you're using a manually focusing lens, it is possible to photograph someone moving if you're not too close, if the aperture is not too wide open, if the person is not moving too quickly, and if you somehow can anticipate the moves a little bit. And also when taking wider shots, it's not really necessary to have the focus exactly on the pupil. I would say if you take a real portrait, if you go close and you take a portrait, it is necessary to have the focus on the pupil. This is clear. But if you are further away, like in this one, it would have been okay to have the focus somewhere in this face at an aperture of like f4 or something like this. But this was all not the case. And then this gentleman, what he was doing, he was moving very swiftly from one pose to another. And I was trying to catch him, like just the moment before he was changing the pose, so because that's the moment when you get some intention in the face, right? But it turned out I was not I was not able to get any good shot. And this photo looks okay because the subject matter is interesting, but from the photographical point of view, it's a whole disaster. If the face only looks sharp because I was like using a lot of clarity in the post-processing, and also on his body I was painting in the clarity and everything. It's like this photo was a mess. Don't do all these things which I have just told you about, right? So here's another photo also of an ifugao, which turned out to be much better. And this is Actually, I didn't have a computer with me at this time. I was shooting with them for like 3 days, and actually, to make a real analysis of the photos and of my mistakes, I have been able to do so only 2 months afterwards, when I was back in Europe and when I was having my computer. Before, I was only able to judge the photos on the small back side of the camera. And fortunately here I was stopping down a little bit. I had different lighting and like different situation. This guy gave me a dreamy look. I mean, still it's not the wide look which I wanted to have, but I think it's at least this turned out an okay photo from the photographical point of view.
Let's take a look now at another photo. It has been shot in the same pole house. You can see the smoke coming from the fire. The skull, by the way, it was not there. It was me putting it there. I thought would give it a nice touch. You can argue with this. The skull has been on the house on the outside. Actually, there were hundreds of skulls on the outside. The house was covered with it. And actually, the meaning is the more skulls and the bigger the skulls, the more wealthy the owner of the house is. This house has been owned by a Datu, which means, like, the Datu is the chief of the tribe. And also interesting to know, in modern Filipino language, the word Datu means wealthy. But let's take a closer look at this photo now. And it looks contrasty, it looks sharp and everything. And let's take a deeper look and let's zoom in a little bit. And what we see when zooming in on her face, we see that the area of the of focus, it's like around here, I would say. You can realize it by looking at the eyelashes. And we get an idea about how this lens is resolving by looking at her eye, by looking at the skin, and there is no frequency separation or anything applied here. It's like you can get a good idea about the resolution when looking at the photo like this, and also the structure of the clothes. And let's now compare it to a similar photo taken with Loxia. And I know this photo, the lighting is horrible. It looks like if she was a deer on the street struck by the lights of your car, but just it's just meant to compare the resolution, right? And so I'm comparing this lens to the Loxia. It makes no sense at all to compare it to the Nocturnus, because the Nocturnus is as soft as a cloud. This is absolutely clear. Comparing it to another lens like the Voigtländer would be ridiculous, you know. And so it's worth to notice. I mean, I try to make this review as honest as possible, but it's not a lab review, right? It's worth to notice that here I am a little bit closer to the subject than here, you know, I'm a little bit further away. But to give you the full story, also this photo has been cut a little bit. In the original, the knees of the girl has been in, just to be super correct, right? And now let's zoom in on her face. And I think what we see is that, to me, this looks much sharper, right? It seems that the Loxia is having a better resolution, right? Also here, that's my impression, right? Even if these photos are not comparable 100% to each other. Let's take a look at some more photos. This one, also with the Loxia 50mm. Actually, let's take a look at the data here. So ISO is 100, aperture is f2. So actually, this photo has been shot
at the softest aperture of the Loxia, right? Where the Loxia is the softest. And let's zoom in and let's take a look. Of course, this photo again, I mean, it's a much tighter shot, right? But nevertheless, I think when zooming in, we get a pretty good idea about how this lens is resolving, right? And I think it's absolutely fantastic. Let's compare it to another shot from the Voigtländer. Let's take this one, and also let's take a look at the data first. And okay, I admit it has been shot at an ISO of 800. Actually, for the Sony Alpha system, 800 is nothing, you know. It might add tiny little bit of grain, but I think it's hardly noticeable. At f6, this lens should be the sharpest, right? And so this shot has been wider, right? And let's zoom in a little bit, and I think what we see is like what we have expected to see. Actually, here this is motion blur. I don't take this into account. But when looking here at all the details, here it's becoming unsharp. But I think you get an idea about how this lens resolves. It's not bad by no means, but it's a difference to the Loxia. Now, because this has been shot at higher ISO, let's take a look at another one from the Loxia. I know this one has also been shot at higher ISO, and also it's a wider shot, so it might be more fair to compare to this one. Let's take a look at the data. I mean, again, these are not lab results, but I think I have a pretty good feeling about it. This one has been shot at an ISO of 3200 even. Apertures f3.5. The Loxia, it's the sharpest at f6, I would say. So it's not at its sharpest. And let's, you see how wide this photo actually is. And let's zoom in, and I mean, this is motion blur, right? But I mean, if you take a look at her facial features, at the hair and everything, now I think it should be obvious that there is like a big difference between the Loxia and the Voigtländer. And so I don't want to make the Voigtländer worse than it is, because actually, to be totally honest, I mean, the resolving power of the cameras and of the lenses today, it's ridiculous. And we do not look at photos at 100% magnification, right? So it's arguable whether this is making any sense or not, because if you're looking at this photo like this, it's sharp and it has good contrast and it's totally okay. It's, you know, the resolving power, it comes into play, you know, it's giving you some more options. For example, if like you want to increase the contrast in the eye, if you want to make the eye more intense, like what many do is just sharpening or just increasing clarity of the eye, and it will look ridiculous. But if you have like good resolving power, you can go to the tiny details and to the features, and you can like not increasing the contrast, the global contrast in the eye, but what you can do go to the highlights and make them a little bit brighter, and you know, then afterwards it will be a better result. It will look much more naturally, even though you have sharpened the eye. I think this is where the resolving power for me comes into play. When looking at this photo or when printing it, actually it makes no difference if you have shot it with a Loxia or the Voigtländer.
Did I already mention that this lens is great for traveling because it's very compact on the camera, and you you can take it with you everywhere, and it's not putting too much weight in your luggage. And when you're traveling, another genre which you might like to do is street photography. And I'm not a big street photographer, but so it's arguable whether this photo is street photography or not. It might not be, but maybe it's a little bit in the style of street photography. You know, the first thing is this lens. If you put like if you stop it down a little bit, you can do infinity focusing with it, and it's giving you a nice landscape and nice possibilities for street photography. It's also having a very good focal length for it. Many street photographers they love the 35. There are also people who like the 50mm, but as it seems to me, more like the 35, right? And the 40mm, it lives close to the 35, right? Somewhere in between both of them. And also, such photos we often like to develop in black and white. And what it turns out is that the black and white from this lens also, it's really amazing. In many cases, you do not even need to do so much post-processing. Maybe I think what I was doing in this photo, I was dialing down the highlights just a tiny little bit, because the outside was very bright, and I was like I was increasing the clarity. It's very popular to increase the clarity these days. Just a tiny little bit. Clarity, by the way, what it is, in Lightroom you're having the clarity slider, and what it actually does, it's increasing the contrast in the frequency, in the mid frequencies. And you can see this if you try some other developers, like for example Darktable. Like, they're not having just a couple of sliders, but they're having many sliders. And if you want to increase there are presettings for it, like clarity, and when you increase the clarity, so that you would have the same effect like in Lightroom, like what is happening, the sliders for the mid frequencies, they go more to the right, so the contrast there is increased. So this is what clarity actually is. So another photo from this genre. This in no way is a good photo, but I just want to show you what a photo with this lens in a similar situation might look like. The bottle here in the front, it's totally off, and there's motion blur in her hand. Her facial expression is not so interesting, and not a good photo. But the situation had potential, and I think with this lens, it's really it's as if it was made for such kind of photography. It's like, I think if you're doing this kind of photography, street photography, you'll be very happy with this lens. Again, this photo, very little post-processing. I think I dialed down the highlights a little bit and increased clarity a tiny little bit. You would be surprised how little clarity you have to put in, because this lens already delivers like a good amount of clarity. It's like it's really for this genre with the Loxia, I would say I would have to do much more post-processing. Now are coming all the shitty photos at the end, but you know what? I want to do something else with these photos. Is this actually is not developed. It's a raw file, just out of, not out of camera, but out of the raw converter. And I must admit, if you export a raw file from a raw converter, it is already doing some processing. You know, there are already algorithms inside to increase the accutance, for example. But what I'm doing is for this photo and also for the next one. Actually, this photo is, I think it has some potential as, you know, the girl on the beach. It's nice. And what I will do, I put these raw files for you to download so that you can really take a closer look at them, so that you can zoom in if you want, and to get like an even better impression. Also, these other photos here coming next, you know, I was they're a little bit funny. I was just actually I took these photos to see what the effect with this lens would be, you know, what the bokeh is like, how shallow the depth of field, and that's why I was taking these photos. So I hope this review has been helpful for you. If you have any comments, if you have been using this lens or the Loxia, or even if you disagree with me on some point, just leave a comment beneath this video. If you want to shoot with Jasmine Shafrat, I think she's like, she's really, I would say, she's crazy about photography and modeling. She'll be happy for every contact. Let me know, and I hope I could help you with your buying decision. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.